All right, welcome to the December 2022 Disability Ministry Video Roundtable from Key Ministry. My name is Beth Golick from Key Ministry. I'm joined by my colleague, pointing down here because that's where she is on my screen, Catherine Boyle, who is our Director of Mental Health Ministry. And today, we're obviously talking about a topic that a lot of you are interested in because we had people jump on right away. So we're talking about volunteers and volunteer training, best practices. And so we are glad that you're here today as part of the conversation, whether you're here because you really need help in this area, or you're here because you have great information to share, or perhaps a little of both. So I do not have an agenda for this meeting. I really want this to be a conversation. So I'm going to open it up. If anybody would like to jump in with either a question, like a struggle that you're having right now, a win, or like, hey, this is what's working for us. I invite you to jump in now and share. And Catherine and I will monitor the chat. And if you are directing us to resources, we're going to make sure that all the links get posted when we post this recording on our website and on our YouTube and Vimeo channels. Phew, that's a lot of info I just said. So somebody else take it from here. Who would like to start us off? And if nobody does, I'm going to call on somebody. And I know, oh, Amy, yay.
So I have a question. If you are doing training with your volunteers, how often are you doing it? Like our kids ministry is doing it way more than I am, but how often do you do it? And I can't say enough. Thank you, Barb, for all of your videos, because that is exactly what I'm using to train my volunteers all the time. So it is fabulous. And I'm sharing it with every other church I'm talking to.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to answer Amy's question, but at first I want to provide more context to what you said about Barb. So let's put your question on hold for a second, because I want to introduce Barb and let her tell us a little bit about her ministry, because yes, her volunteer training videos are fabulous. So Barb, if you wouldn't mind jumping in here and sharing a little bit about the resources that you have to offer, and then we'll go back and address Amy's question.
Well, first, Amy, thank you so much. That's very kind of you to say. So I lead Wonderful Works Ministry, and volunteer training is our specialty. And what we do is we create usually 5 to 7 minute animated videos that are designed for volunteers in mind. So for people who may not do this more than once a month, you need something that's really engaging and really easy to understand. So we make these, and they're free in our Facebook group for anyone who wants to become a Facebook group member. And then we also do expert in the field, longer interviews to really dig deep for leaders who want to learn more. And we try to help people who have specific questions kind of get pointed in the right direction to the organizations that are specialized in what they really need. So that's kind of what we do. And we did that because a couple of reasons. One is that I was on staff at my church for a long time, as a lot of you are. And when it comes to volunteer training, what usually happens is you have a couple of meetings a year. You get about 25% of your volunteers to come, and they retain about 10% of what you say. So when we structure our volunteer training around these big events, we are missing it. And this is one of the reasons, in my opinion, why the church has been so behind when it comes to disability ministry, because disability training is new for most people. So if you're only getting 10% of what you need to know twice a year, you can't really expect that it's going to be successful. So our idea was that we wanted to shift that whole paradigm to not being about a couple of big events, but being ongoing training all the time at little chunks of information at a time. So our videos are designed to be shown whenever. They can be shown before service to a group of volunteers who are serving that day. They can be sent out to volunteers at home. They're very versatile. But what we encourage is that training is all the time. So how we do training at our church is that it is all the time. For us, particularly when we onboard someone, we go through a formal training, kind of what you're talking about, Amy, where we really are going over those safety procedures and the things they need to know and all the paperwork and giving them an overview. But then we kind of switch that mode to hands-on learning where they're shadowing, where there's someone kind of with them. And then as they go on their own, the leaders are still watching and constantly helping along the way.
All right, good info. So if you take a look in the chat, but I'll read it for those of you who either can't see the chat or watching the recording, wonderfulworks.net is the website you want to check out. And as Barb mentioned, there's a Facebook group as well. So yeah, please do check out those resources, really good stuff. So let's go back to Amy's question for a second. So I know Barb answered it for her church. Would anybody else like to share how often you're doing volunteer training?
I could share. This is Brown over in Davis, California. So we might be a little more informal than lots of places, but I think that's okay. For one, I love Barb's idea and comment about kind of onboarding like a real time in real life training. So when we get a new volunteer, or maybe someone is working with a class they never worked with or a kid they never worked with, I usually try to get in there, or someone who's, able to speak into that, kind of coach them along, for those Sundays. And then after those Sundays are over, just say, hey, how'd it go? Kind of troubleshoot. So kind of in real time, so they can have that time to reflect. Because sometimes I have no idea what they've experienced or from their lens. And so it's nice to hear that and give them space to kind of do that. Maybe on the more formal structured side, we have an internship with high school students who do disability ministry alongside me. And we meet twice a month, sometimes 3 times a month, to do leadership development, to do training, to do troubleshooting, to do team building, all those kinds of things. And that has probably been the most successful training ground, is to create an internship where students have a lot of buy-in and a lot of ability to develop themselves and to develop the ministry. And we've been doing it for probably about 3 years, maybe 4 now. And it's been a really nice way to onboard people to have a lot of buy-in and a lot of desire to really engage.
Love that. So does anybody else have an intern in their area? Lot of no's, a lot of shaking heads. Bronwyn, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we have in the past. I currently do not have one, but we have had internship programs, and so we have done interns in the past.
Okay, great.
I also, to echo what we do, I'm from the Bible Chapel in Pittsburgh, and so about trainings, it's similar to what the last 2 people have said, where as someone comes on, we have an onboarding. One of the things that I've started to do recently, because so many of my volunteers have been there for years, is in my emails, I've started adding video links to different trainings, or just explaining what autism is, or explaining different disabilities, and how individuals who have those disabilities can relate to things and how we can help them. And I found that to be helpful. Our volunteers have found that to be almost more helpful than coming to a training, because like what was stated, they can't make it, or they get about 10% of what you hear. So that's something I've started to try. If somebody wants to learn more, they're able to. If they don't feel like they need to or don't want to, then they don't have to come to that training.
Right. So good, thank you. So that's yes, so good point that sometimes training isn't actually an in-person meeting. Sometimes it's sending out links to videos, either ones from Wonderful Works or some other resources. Yeah, I love that. I know our children's ministry staff created a series of videos for our volunteers, and they included not just like this, the safety procedures and kind of best practices for the classroom, but also like what the staff expects from volunteers and what the volunteers should expect from staff. So it's a series of 4 videos that that our volunteers watch. I want to go back to interns for a second. So Amy shared that they've had a summer intern for the last couple of years, and Mackenzie shared, yeah, you were an intern before being hired as staff. So that's really cool. before I was on staff here at the church, I was a volunteer, and this isn't the same as being an intern, but the person who was the director at the time invited me to go to a disability ministry conference with her. And that kind of led into a whole bunch of things. So do pour into your people, to your volunteers, to your interns. It could be a life changer. All right. Who else wants to share about how often you're meeting to train your volunteers? Let me ask you this. Has it changed since March of 2020? Yeah. Would anybody like to share like what you used to do and what you're doing now?
I'll share a little bit. I'm Allison from Union Center Christian Church in Binghamton, New York. And our situation's a little bit different because most of our kids are, actually all of our kids integrate really well in the classroom without any one-on-one aids or special resources or anything like that. And so we do have things like picture schedules and timers and environments that are welcoming for inclusion, but we don't have any kids who have a lot more issues than what's covered by that. So our situation's a little bit different. I've been in this position for 4 years, and in my first couple years, I just did one-off event things, like a safety training before the semester started and that kind of thing. In November, we just launched a module style training. And so it's going to be one module per month for the next, I don't know, year or so. And it's going to be, so it's sort of an intense training, but it's not required. And it goes from everything from curriculum to safety to inclusion and that kind of thing. And so most of it is at home at your own pace. There's worksheets and videos. And then the people can pick up, the modules are always available in our children's wing for people to pick up as they're ready. So it's really an at your own pace kind of thing. There'll be a couple that are super hands-on that trainings that will be in person for, but in general, it's just kind of at your own pace at home. And the feedback I've gotten so far after the first 2 modules have come out has been really, really good.
Oh, good.
And I've also added a discipleship piece. So in the beginning of the thing, so each module takes about an hour and a half, but it doesn't have to be a continuous hour and a half. So there's always a formation piece in the beginning that's some kind of spiritual formation exercise that aligns with the values of our church and the value that goes with the content of the module. So it's been really good so far. Yeah, I'm kind of interested to see how it continues. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's very cool. And does anybody have any questions for Allison on what she just shared? Yes, Mackenzie.
Yes. So with that at your own pace, we've tried doing that, like where we send it out with like our volunteer emails and it's like, get to it when you can. But we've been really struggling with like people showing interest in it. Like we can tell we're like, oh, did you watch a video? Oh no, we'll get to it. Like, I don't know if you have a way to get your volunteers' interest in these self-led videos and stuff. But I feel like that's something that we've been struggling with.
Part of this and the reason we're doing this training is because we've sort of bumped into disability ministry because those kids just show up at our church. And so the teachers have been without training for so long that they're eating it up.
Oh.
So that's part of it. I think that I have really good relationships with all of our volunteers and have built a level of trust, and I'm constantly in the classrooms kind of modeling and giving tips and working with kids and that kind of thing. And so I think that relationship is really helpful, that it's not like this corporate kind of ask. It's very personal and very relational. So
Yeah, and
again, but I have no idea how many people are doing it. So
well, you brought up a good point that like it personally affects them. Like they are experiencing this need, and so they're wanting the information. Barb, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so the way that our church has done this is that our church has a morning huddle with the people who are volunteering that morning before each service. And so once a month, they'll show one of the videos that's like 5 minutes long, or maybe they'll just even bring up a training that's like 5 minutes long on one thing. And so all the people who are serving that day watch it. And what's great about that is that it's not just for your buddies or for the people in your disability ministry, it's for all of the volunteers. So they're all getting that basic information. And that seems to have worked pretty well and people like it.
Thank you.
Barb, other Barb, sorry.
Yeah,
Barb
I have,
Ann.
I have a question. And this is all great information. We are trying to develop something for adult disability. And I'm wondering, I'm sure a lot of the training would apply in a similar way, but is there anybody here today that's dealing with adults and their kind of training?
I am Barb. And my situation's kind of unique because I'm serving in Guatemala. So our trainings are all in Spanish, but we have 2 residential programs for adults with disabilities that we're trying to disciple people. And we're trying to bring in individuals from the local churches to kind of buddy with our residents because they're very diverse.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's the thing that I've seen. And actually here in Guatemala, we had our first national meeting for disability ministry this past month.
Wow.
So I'm kind of excited, but everybody thinks about children and we forget that there's a bigger discrepancy in putting an adult with disabilities into an adult Sunday school class. And so I'm using a lot of picture symbols from PECS. I don't know if you're familiar with board making. And so I'd love to connect with you because we've taken like the Foundation of the Faith class for Calvary Chapel here, and we've rewritten it in picture symbols. And so we're using a lot of those kinds of things for individuals who can't read, but trying to make things look, sometimes it's the same curriculum, but made to look more grown up, and the activities are more grown up.
Yeah. Oh, great. That would, and your first name again is what?
I'm Pat Duff.
Pat Duff. Okay. I'm Barb
And
Mason.
I'm with Reason to Hope Ministries here in Guatemala.
Okay. Beth,
And I can help, or you can direct message each other in the chat if you want, or I can
Okay.
help connect you after the thing.
Great. Thank you.
Wonderful. I love it.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to get us up to date on some stuff going on in the chat. So Bronwyn shared that Ability Ministry, so that's abilityministry.com, has some free resources. They do a lot of great things with adults and curriculum. So do check out abilityministry.com. Amy shared that Lesson Pix, that's lessonpix.com, is a great site to create, that's like the picture symbols. And she says it's $39 a year. I know I use Boardmaker. That's, I want to say more like $99 a year. All right, good stuff, people.
Thanks.
What else?
I see
Yes,
one other
Barb
website.
S. Oh,
Oh, go ahead.
Barb S
go ahead.
and then Bronwyn.
I was going to say, so one of the most important things with volunteer training is actually working on your volunteer retention, because once you have those people, if they stay, then you can keep building on what they know. So part of that is really finding ways for your team members to grow and feel fulfilled. So one of the things that we have done that has been very successful is a lot of our training actually is figuring out how to handle a new problem. So it's not just like, here's the basics. It's like, here's a student and all of a sudden, they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing. we actually invite their team members in, sometimes along with their parents, to all kind of talk it through, or invite some of the people in our church who have professional special education backgrounds to help us. And when we build the people into the solution, not only do they learn it and want to share it together, but it also helps them really stay in the ministry. So I would just encourage finding ways to equip and empower your people through training too.
That's really good. Thank you for sharing that. Bronwyn, did you have something to share?
Oh, sure. If people want to hear it. Sure.
We do.
So kind of to that point of getting the critical mass trained, what we did, and this is definitely post-COVID out of kind of necessity, was just in like children's ministry in general, we changed the way lessons were taught, material, information was delivered. We changed the way groups were oriented, all of those things. And it was actually, we changed it to be more inclusive, not only for the kids with disabilities, but because of the impact of the pandemic on our students. And so when we've done our last couple children's ministry trainings in general, we invite everyone involved with children's ministry at all. So any teachers, any support people, any inclusion people, anybody who does even like checking in the families, anyone who does nursery, anyone. And we train them all on kind of these new ways to sort of teach and to communicate information and how to respond and engage students. And that has probably been, I mean, we got, 180 people done. Like they did that. And so, it was kind of, I think someone said, I can't remember who it was, people wanted this because like, oh, I'm seeing this in my classes. I want to know how to do this. I want this. But if I said, hey, come to, a training on disability, some people would come, some people wouldn't, but we said, hey, we're going to give you skills to impact all of your classrooms and to, enhance all of your classrooms. So that's been really successful. I will say that took like 5.5 years to get to that point. So if your church isn't there, it's okay, because we weren't there for a while. So it took a while to get to that point. And it also took a pandemic. Not that I would choose that to do that again, but it accelerated it a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go ahead and say it. That's a pandemic blessing.
I knew you would.
Pandemic blessing. Yep. So, okay. So Bronwyn brought up something just really super important. And I love it. And I'm grateful that her church has moved there. And that is kind of moving from a silo ministry, like we're just going to train our, special, I'm air quoting here, special needs ministry volunteers in this, but really equipping children's ministry volunteers and your greeters and just everybody with, some skills, some strategies, awareness, just some things that can be maybe put in place that might help a few students, but really help all. So it's that whole idea of universal design, like what might help a few can really help everybody. I'm going to ask Catherine if you could put in the chat a link to either there's this kid ADHD or there's this kid anxiety. So Key Ministry has a couple of PDFs, like downloadables, that really can walk volunteers through we have one on anxiety, one on ADHD. So what this might look like in your Sunday school classroom, and what are some strategies, what are some even ways that you set up your classroom, or how you include all kids in your Sunday mornings. Anyway, so those are free downloadable resources, and we'll get those linked in the chat and on the, so the link that Catherine shared in there, you'll be able to access both downloadables from that page. Oh, and there's the actual things. Okay, good job, Catherine. All right, let me ask you a question. How many of you do, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, because who was saying like as you get new kids, you might have new situations and new, yes, Barb said that. How many of you do case-based or like scenario training, case-based training? Does anybody do that? And do you want to share how you do that? If you don't do that, do you think it's a good idea? Any thoughts?
Hey, Beth, can I chime in here? Hi. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Samantha Jones. I'm with Benevolence United, and we do offer trainings. We walk with churches to incorporate disability ministries with excellence. That's basically where we're partnering with Key Ministries just here in Virginia. And when we work with churches, we do scenario-based. We pull in, we like to connect the community with churches. So we pull in OTs, PTs, ABAs, either from our staff, or if it's not from our staff, from somebody in the community. And then they can walk through some scenario-based. Some of the best conversations have been really helpful with OTs. And I love, it's kind of like what Barb was saying earlier. When you have a specific concern with a specific kiddo, it might not be overall for everybody, right? So if they have a PT already, if they have an OT already, bringing them in with a conversation with mom, dad, teachers, and then having that, and then sharing that with your team, like, hey, this is what we did, and this is how we can best serve this family and this kiddo. So that's just been a really good practice that we've seen, and it's something that churches can do on their own as well. They're connected with somebody in the community. So you don't necessarily need somebody like Benevolence United or Key Ministry to do that. Just connecting with your kiddos, PTs, OTs, referrals, things like that. It's been very helpful.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Samantha. Does anybody have any questions or comments based on what Samantha just shared? And I know, Bronwyn, you've done some like scenario type training. Do you mind sharing how you've done that?
Oh man, I feel like I've talked too much, but yes, I could.
Never.
I'm an Enneagram 2, so I'm like, how do people feel about this? This was kind of a little bit before the pandemic, but when we'd have our trainings, sometimes it'd say, okay, volunteers, what are you guys seeing in your classes that either like you want help with, support, or you're not sure what to do about? So we would just list a ton of things on the board, like, kids crying when their mom leaves, kids hiding under tables during transitions, kids trying to leave the classroom, all those things. We just list all these things on the board. And then I'd say, okay, say we had like 12 things listed. I'd say, okay, we're going to create some scenarios out of each of these. I'd split the volunteer group into smaller groups. Okay, here, you guys each get, a fake kid based on this scenario. What kinds of strategies would you use? And that was actually, and most of these are high schoolers that are kind of engaging in this like process of thinking. And it was actually really awesome because some of them thought of ideas that I never would have thought of. And I said, oh, and they said, oh, we could do this, that, or the other. I said, oh, I actually never would have thought about that. So I feel like I learned a lot too from those kind of case studies. And I think it's also really helpful to take the behavior like out of like a specific person, right? So it's just like, this is like a behavior, not like a specific person, because I think you can be a little bit more objective and you can think maybe a little bit more outside the box. It was really helpful.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's great. For those of you who are not super familiar with Bronwyn's ministry, she has a ton of teen volunteers. Like, it's phenomenal. And it makes, I think makes it a little bit unique, or at least different from many of the churches that I, have spoken to or work with. But I think there's so much value there. And just like what you've just shared there, like you're learning from them as well as they're learning from you. So that's really cool. All right, who has another question or a situation or a struggle? Mackenzie, yes.
So one thing that we have been doing with our ministry that has kind of helped us get to know our kids too, like when they do come in and they are new and you're like really like have no clue, we do what we call our family conversations, where we meet with every family as they come in, and the parents will tell us what makes them tick, what makes them happy, what if they're at this level, how do we get them here? So then when we do have our volunteers that are super consistent, we can train them with that specific kid and just let them know this thing really triggers them. So if they encounter this, this is how you bring them down. And that has really helped us tremendously, just engaging with the parent, because it's not just the kid, the family struggles with all of this. So that's what I feel like has been the most like beneficial on our end for sure to help with our training.
That's great. So what I'm hearing here is that you're kind of working on that consistency between home and church, maybe even school. Like I know a lot of students have like really specific either visuals or words that go along with maybe their behavior plan. And like, what a blessing to families if you can be consistent with the tools and the strategies that the child is familiar with from their school setting, and hopefully then their home setting and the church setting.
That's
So-
what we've noticed, that consistency is really what's key. Like we had a mom this past Sunday tell us, oh, like we've been going through his actions and associating them with colors. So if he's acting like super outburst, he'd be like, oh, well, that's a red emotion. Do you want to feel that red emotion? And they're like, no. And then they can like consciously see that. So then, but that consistency within the home, or if we opened up a new room in our space and one of our boys, it was going to be his first time in there. So we sent pictures home so he can be very familiar with that space before he even comes in. So it's already that consistent. So he's not caught off guard and there's nothing new that we implement without them having that familiarized at home.
Yeah, I love that. So that's really working, together, a community of your volunteers, the family. I love that. And how empowering it is for the volunteers if they're part of this conversation. So if they know about the colors or whatever it is and how to use those, I think it's empowering for the volunteers. I think that's going to help with volunteer retention, because then they're not frustrated and they're able to better connect with the student, with the family. It's a win-win. Amy, you have your hand up.
So we do a lot of that too. We do an intake form, and in my hallways, we have a special needs coach in the hallway along with the kids coaches. So when I get an intake form and it talks about their triggers and what works and what doesn't work, not only do the special needs coaches have it, but it immediately goes to the teachers and to the kids coaches that are in that hallway so that they know as well. And taking pictures, I think, is awesome. One of the things that I've done too is the social stories. So we have one at church and one that goes home. So they read it at home, and then when they get here, the teacher or the buddy or whoever reads it with them as well. So, and that again, lessonpics.com, it's so easy. I tried Boardmaker earlier, and unless you understand how to use it.
Yeah, I remember you and I actually talked like several years ago, and we couldn't even figure out like how to share it.
Yes, and Lesson Pick is so simple. I mean, you just drop them and you can create anything you want with it. So it's been a tremendous help.
I will say, if you don't have access to any of those things, there is a downloadable, there are a couple, or maybe one, downloadable visual schedule type thing, or a first then board on the Key Ministry website that is available to you all. So yes, Barb S.
I just wanted to add to what they said. Our church does a similar, where we do the intake form and talk to the parents and get the plan. And then what I was taught was to put that into a buddy book, which is like a little photo album that's really small. And then you write down like bullet points of the most important information that anyone who's serving with that child should know. And we keep that in each child's buddy bag, or if they're in the sensory friendly classroom right there. And what's helpful for that is if you have a substitute or a new someone serving, they have that information. You don't have to try to remember it. And we see even now people who serve all the time look at those buddy books as soon as they get into the service before they serve. So it was just a nice, helpful tip someone gave me once.
I love that. And it's portable. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie.
I was just going to share another resource too. There's, I follow on Instagram, so I think the website, but it's the Adapted Word. So anytime I find people that do social stories or visual schedules, especially particular to churches, that's another great resource that she has a lot of different things that are created for curriculum and social stories and those kinds of things. very similar to what Mackenzie was talking about for our church. One of the things I share with our volunteers is one of the greatest gifts I can give them is the understanding and knowledge of the kiddo they're working with. So going through a questionnaire with a family, having a personal conversation. Our team leads with the gifts and strengths and the things that they like versus, the disability is important to know and those things that maybe don't work as well. We definitely need to show, but leaning with those gifts and strengths of our family. So I feel really good about that part of training in what we're offering for our volunteers, that knowledge of the kid that they're working with in their spaces. I think one of the struggles that I still have, which I appreciated hearing maybe letting go of a little bit, is that we have 10 campuses all over. So I've really been putting a lot of emphasis in getting the team together to train them. Not because I feel like I know all the things, but I want to share with them so that they feel comfortable being in the spaces. But it's so challenging to get everyone together in one location. So I guess I really appreciated like maybe letting go of that a little bit more and figuring out different ways to train them through videos that we can email or through huddles or those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's the biggest struggle is there's so much information to share. And how do you do that effectively?
Yeah. So maybe if nothing else, our discussion today has kind of given us all that, like, it's okay to maybe not do these huge, talking at them training sessions, but being okay with being creative to come up with some other ways to communicate. So I'm going to call on Jacqueline in 1 second, but Catherine did share in the chat a page. If you go to the keyministry.org and then it's /classroom-strategies, you can scroll down and get that downloadable printable that we mentioned. Jacqueline.
Yeah, I just had 2 quick questions. Can you repeat the handle of the Instagram name? And then the other thing was, how often do you update the buddy booklet for each kid? So that was kind of our issue is we did that originally. And then, we all change as we grow older. Behaviors definitely change. And it just became really hard to keep up with it. And it felt like it was like not enough volunteers. How do you keep that like information safe? We have the way our ministry is set up is we kind of have a wing that we do ministry in. And so I just don't want that information to be out there. So I know that you said you had like a sensory room and it could be in there. So I just more like, what was the information that you put on it? How did you keep that safe? And how often did you update it?
Yeah, so let's open that to everybody. Real quick, the Instagram, so it's theadaptedword.com. And is that Laura? Is it Laura that does that? Who was talking? Was it Carrie that said? Is Laura the adapted word?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah, so you could check that out on Instagram. It's the.adapted.word.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself when I said yes. It's Laura. Sorry about that.
All right, but let's talk a little bit about how we capture the information that might be like what information, how we capture it on students, and then how are we keeping that information safe, because it's not it's not something that like if it's a public room that other ministries use, like they don't need access to that information. So would anybody like to share what's on their intake form and how they use it and how often they update it? Amy, was your hand raised, Amy?
Yeah.
Okay, and then Lauren, we'll get to you.
So our intake forms, we have binders in all the kids' hallways, and they have got medical, if there's children that like have asthma or whatever. So we've created a tab underneath that's special needs intake forms. So they're tucked away like in their offices. So they know to access that. I love the idea of the buddy booklet though. That's something that would be really neat because they don't always go to the binder to learn anything new. But I'm interested how often you update, because I try to do it at least every 2 years when I remember, but they change so quickly. How do you get the parents
change a lot into like young kids change a lot in 2 years? Yeah. I just realized like how out of date mine are.
And
Lauren,
to get the parents updated, it's really difficult.
The way that we did it was we created a new intake form called update form. And so our original intake form is super long because it encompasses all kinds of stuff. And parents just fill out what they need. But the update form was very short and kind of just asked for the most things that were variable that could change. And I tried to send that out once a year. I'm not going to say that I always remembered that, but that was the intent. And then we would just update the books from there. And the books were super easy because they're just like those photo albums. So you just pull the page out, put the new one in. So that's kind of how we did it. And as far as like the privacy, in the intake forms, you're going to get every information you need and you're going to keep that private. But for the buddy books, or if you have something on the wall, you're going to use common sense. And if something is really private, you're not going to put that in there. That's going to be just a verbal reminder to someone. You just think like, what would you want people to know about you, and kind of use that as your guide. That's what we've done.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call on Lauren and then Carrie.
Hi. So we update our information about the kids every summer. So I try to start mid-July to August, where kids are going into transition. There might be changes in school. And I try to actually call and communicate with parents myself. And it's usually a phone call, and then update it right there, and then add that information to the buddies when we start our new semester in September. The thing that we've done is put it on clipboard. So we have a clipboard that everybody has every Sunday that has kind of what you were saying about your buddy book, where just like it's just the vital information. Like it has the parent's name, their contact number, so we don't have to go through the computer system if there's a problem. And sorry about that. And also on that clipboard, one of the things that we've done because of the rotation of buddies is we have a form on there that just has some basic information that the buddies can talk about. That can say, this went well today. He was able to listen to the story, so that the buddies then can see what the child did the week before, the 2 weeks before. So it's a way for the buddies to communicate from week to week. So that clipboard comes out every Sunday, and then they're collected at the end of service every Sunday and put in a private place. I go through them to make sure if there was some issue that happened that we were unaware of, that wasn't traumatic, obviously, but they're having difficulty, like the child's always having being emotional the last 10 minutes of children's ministry, that sort of thing, that I can see themes. But that clipboard is given to those buddies every Sunday and then collected back.
So I like that because, again, that's empowering the volunteers. That's giving them a little bit more information, allowing them to kind of speak into the situation. And I like that. Thank you, Lauren. Carrie, and then Allison.
So we also have an intake form that we call a questionnaire. So it goes through their diagnosis, allergies, all the things like, anyways, sorry, trying to think through a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then we go through like gifts and strengths and those kinds of things. We have the questionnaire. We just have our families fill that out one time. So as they're new or have a new diagnosis, we have them fill it out once. And then we transition that information and conversation from a family to what we call an all about me sheet. So it just gives a 1-page synopsis of the kiddo, and that's where we change the information. So we don't go back and have a family fill out a questionnaire again. Maybe once a year. We had started updating information once a year in the summer, but that just got to be really overwhelming. So we're doing that like every weekend, whether that be the volunteers are passing on information. So they'll write on that all about me sheet things that worked within the service that weekend that they could pass on to the other volunteer, new additional diagnosis or things that are changing from early childhood to elementary to student ministries. So that's really our form that we're constantly updating information. We're doing that in real time versus carving out time maybe in the summer or once a year or twice a year. I feel like then we get overwhelmed and information gets lost. So we're doing that continuously through that all about me sheet. And then we'll take that and like maybe discard one and update it, if there's a lot of changes to information.
So you're getting like info from actual in the classroom Yeah, so that's good.
Yep.
All right.
And then also taking information, if parents are sharing things with us too, we update it on that form versus having them go through and fill out the 3-page questionnaire all over again, just to update, a few pieces of information.
I like that. All right, we're gonna go Allison, Samantha, Mackenzie. Allison.
I just had a quick note on the privacy issue. I don't ever make that decision. I let the parents do that. So we have a special like line item-ish kind of thing after every, can't remember if it's after every category or just at the end of the form, like what information is okay to share with teachers and volunteers, what information is not okay to share with teachers and volunteers. So I'm never making those privacy decisions. I just put that in the hands of the parents and follow that. So that works really good for us.
That's a really great, a great way to handle that. Yeah, thank you. Samantha.
So we have a form that we use and it's separated into two. One is the intake portion, which goes over the medical and all the, HIPAA violation stuff that you want to keep private. And then the other is a caregiver portion that goes over the mobility, toileting, communication, all of that stuff that your buddies would need to know. And we tell parents that, hey, this is going to be for the directors. And this is what we share with our buddies. So what they like, what they don't like is on there, triggers, calming techniques, things like that. And so that's separate. And so to keep that safe from, let's just say, general public to walk in and say, oh, look, here's a book. This looks fun. Not that that happens, but just in case. We use a double lock procedure. So we have it on a computer or a tablet, depending upon the space. And then we have all the volunteers of the room can access it with a PIN code. So they can look on it whenever they want, they can access it. And then as soon as they turn it off, somebody who has a PIN code can look at it. So there's no oopses. Then you have to really go into, and first you have to know it's there, and then you have to be able to get that code to do that. So we just utilize technology in that way. And it's kind of easy too, because you can type in the kiddo's name and then you're good to go. It'll pop up right there.
Yeah, it's like being in a doctor's office.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah. All right.
And it's easy to update too, because it's, you can cut and paste and copy and do all that. So
yeah, good. Thank you. Mackenzie.
So as everyone's been talking, I've had a question and then I'll share. So it's for Carrie. I really like those sheets written by volunteers, but at our specific events that we have every Sunday, we have 60 kids. And then at our non-religious based events, we can have up to 200 kids. So I feel like that would be, I don't know if you've encountered that could be really, really hard to manage when you're dealing with that many kids. And if one volunteer has kids that aren't as high needs and they're with 6 or 7, they have 6 or 7 kids in their group, it might be a little bit harder than a one-to-one buddy. So I didn't know if you could speak on that.
Sure. I think for us, we don't have to go in and touch every single record every weekend. So it's more just freeing up, if there are things that you discover over the course of the weekend that might be new, that hadn't talked to a family about within the space. And how did the volunteer handle that? Or what did the kid or the student share with us about how they like to be accommodated within that? So I don't feel like, and we're very similar to you in having, a larger number. I don't feel like we have to touch every single record every weekend. It just freed us up from with such a desire to come alongside these kids and families and want to get the right information and get it in the volunteers' hands, that we put so much pressure on ourselves to update that in the summer. And then it was difficult to connect with families because they were gone for breaks. And so it helped us a lot to free us up to do that in real time. But certainly not that we have to touch every single one of those sheets every week, if that's helpful. It's just training, getting it in our volunteers' mindset to say, I learned this either from the family or I saw this in action. Oh, let me go write that down so I can let everyone know. That's helpful.
Okay, thank you. And then the one thing I wanted to share, which I covered up their name because it's one of our examples. One thing we do for our volunteers, they all wear name tags. And in the back, if they are a one-to-one buddy, or have a kid in their group that is a one-to-one buddy, we keep these little papers in the back of their name tags, which just say their general info. They love playing with water and sensory, their eating needs, like if they have any allergies, toileting needs, communication needs. So then they can have it here and they can look at it, but then their name tags don't leave our space. So that when they're done, they hand me their name tag and then we keep it on them. But we've noticed that's really helpful, especially when we do have our new volunteers, because they can look, oh, he's freaking out. Let's see if he wants to play with water, or if he wants to paint, or if he's feeling overstimulated, he can go to our backyard area, or like it says like who one of his good friends are in the group. Oh, we can go see if he wants to hang out with them. And we've noticed that has been super, super beneficial with our volunteers. So I just want to share that little thing. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I love it. So on the flip side of having it kind of sort of visible, like it's, well, let me read what Bronwyn put in the chat. It's not actually the flip side, but it kind of is. And it's about making it obvious that you have this information on a particular student. So some of our parents do not want other volunteers knowing if their child has a particular diagnosis. Others are very open about it. Because of this, in communication with volunteers, I try to address specific behaviors and supports without referring to a diagnosis. So forget what I said about that being the flip side of the name tag thing. That's not really accurate, but I totally agree with what Bronwyn is saying here about it's entirely possible you do not need to know the diagnosis. You just need to know how to help that student be successful, how to help the volunteers be successful, and kind of address the behavior, what the student's trying to communicate, that type of thing, as opposed to needing to know an actual diagnosis. Bronwyn, did I do okay with that?
Yeah, that was great. And I don't know if that's like specific to like our particular population here, but I think it does. Like I did run into some things where people are like, oh, you know, how come like that kid has, you know, autism, or that they don't have autism, so how come they get that support or not? It's like, well, it's not really about autism or not. It's about what they actually need.
Right.
And I didn't realize that education was necessary in a way. So I said, well, let's just talk about the behaviors, right, that we see, and how do we support those behaviors, right, to make them more successful. And so that, I think the labels, and I don't know, maybe that's like specific to where I am, but sometimes the labels people can kind of jump to things that aren't there or not true, or they have different ideas. And so it's been helpful to not use labels.
Yeah. And I think, you know, even just on our discussion right here, but certainly disability ministry in general, you know, we're all picturing like very different situations and environments and all that. But, you know, Key Ministry was founded because of those hidden disabilities. And, you know, certainly there are students with hidden disabilities that, first of all, you're not necessarily going to see in a quote special needs ministry classroom, nor would they want to be associated with a special needs ministry classroom. So we're talking about like the behaviors and what strategies we can put into place that are really going to help all students, all kinds of learners, all, you know, hidden disabilities to physical disabilities. Like, how can we help them be successful? Catherine shared in the chat that that's something we talk about in some of those downloadables that we mentioned, the There's This Kid documents. So how do you address the like the behavior, because behavior is a form of communication, and not necessarily, you don't need to know an actual diagnosis. All right, wow, you guys, we have used up the whole hour. Clearly this was a subject we needed to talk about. Any last minute thoughts or resources you want to share? We cover it all? All right. Yes. So Allison just shared in the chat that this concept works really well, even when the child doesn't yet have a diagnosis. And amen to that. Because again, we don't really care what the diagnosis is. Like we want to help students be successful, help your volunteers be successful, regardless of what the diagnosis is, or if there's a diagnosis. I mean, I feel like our children's ministry here at the church has implemented so many things that are, you know, maybe more disability ministry focused, because they help all students. They help, you know, all different kinds of learners. And so, yes, so Allison, I totally agree with you. Well, I think that's a good place to end. So thanks for being part of this discussion today. I'll go ahead and date this, even though those of you who are listening later, but hey, it's Christmas this week. So Merry Christmas to all of you. It's been a great year hanging out with you guys on a monthly basis, and we look forward to continuing these conversations in the new year. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate all of you, all that you bring to these discussions, and so have a great Christmas. Thanks, guys.